How do we know how many participants are there? It's written now 15.
Yeah. If you want to see the list, then you click on it.
Can I put a print? नीचे कौन है? Can I just put this now?
Yeah, just look.
I'll tell you when I need your phone.
Sadhna ma'am has also joined just now.
Yeah,
Welcome,
I know.
Dr. Sadhna ma'am. Thank you for joining. So ma'am, I'm making you a co-host. You'll be able to control your audio and video. Done. Ma'am, with your permission, should I announce the opening?
Yeah, I think we should start.
Please, ma'am. Thank you very much. Good afternoon and welcome everyone for joining this webinar. My name is Dr. Amit Borse and I'm a Group Product Manager with IVA, a division of MCure Pharmaceuticals Limited. MCure is on a mission to nurture and support 28 days. Programming 28 is a scientific theme for the year and hence our webinars are called Programming 28 webinars. Today we are here again for Dr. Manjujila's masterclass. This is a special initiative by Dr. Manjujila ma'am. You all are aware of Dr. Manjujila ma'am as we have done almost 3 webinars before this. The topics for the previous webinars and the links are available with us and it is also shown on the screen. Ma'am is a director, Jilla Hospital Infertility, IVF ICSI and Advanced Endoscopic Center. Today's topic is COHS protocols and luteal phase support. May I now hand over the session to Dr. Manjujila ma'am. Ma'am, please take over and you can now share your presentation.
I'll just start. For all the audience, today's lecture is something very special for all those who wish to take their infertile patients right up to IVF and then take home a baby. So that is going to add a special armamentarium to their practice. So I want everyone to be interactive and really solve all their difficulties once we finish this topic. And we are going to start with 2 cases. At the end of the entire lecture, we are going to discuss how we are going to manage those 2 cases. These are like our day-to-day patients whom we stimulate for IVF. So let's start with the topic. I will just share my screen with you. Is that good? I'll go into presentation.
Yes,
yeah.
Fantastic.
So the first case which we are going to discuss is, see, today we have actually had an infertile couple, then we have done all their investigations, then in the prior cycle, whatever treatment, like we had to give them antibiotics or we had to give them male antioxidants or whatever we had to do for them, we have done. And now we are taking this patient to stimulate her ovaries and do IVF or ICSI in order to give her a baby. So we are at this part of our discussion. We are going to have 2 cases and we will, after the entire lecture, we will again discuss how we are going to stimulate these patients, what sort of a protocol are we going to write for them. So the first case is that is a couple with a male infertility, that is very, very severe oligospermia. Wife is 23 years old. Her body mass index is just 25. Her AMH is 3, and they are for ICSI. And she has come to you on the second day of her menstrual cycle, and we want to stimulate her ovaries. So, how do we go ahead? The second case is a 32-year-old woman with BMI 30, and she has bilateral tubal block. She is for IVF. Her AMH is actually, I can't see the slide completely, but I think it is 6 or 7. So, how will you stimulate this patient, and what sort of an IVF protocol will you write for her? So, can you take this away?
You can just check your
Right.
view
I did.
options.
Someone's helping me. Don't worry. Someone's really helping me out to put that.
That's a
Yeah.
great.
So this is the second case, right? So now let us start off with the discussion. Last time we had a very detailed theoretical discussion about gonadotrophins and, you know, the ovary and the type of antral follicles and how they become primary, secondary, what are hyposignals, and a long way. It was a very, very theoretical discussion. What we are going to have today is a very, very practical discussion when a patient comes to us, how we are going to manage her. So, what is the aim of stimulating an ovary for IVF or ICSI in today's era? I'm specifying today's era because things have changed from the past. In the past, our stimulations used to be very gentle because we wanted to be very careful with the endometrium. We wanted to transfer fresh embryos and we wanted that they should get implanted. So while we were stimulating the ovaries, we did not want the endometrium to get go ahead in time or prevent implantation because of hyperstimulation. But that is not the case today. The freezing program of the embryos has become very, very strong. Frozen embryos are giving us pregnancies better than fresh embryos. So the aim of stimulation today is not to get worried about the endometrium or about ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, but to get the maximum number of eggs when we are stimulating the ovary. So our entire focus is to give the best stimulation to that ovary so that the entire cohort of antral follicle, whatever is available, is stimulated. All of them grow to 18 to 20 millimeters and all of them give us M2 oocytes. While we are doing this, we also do not want premature LH surge. If we are going to see also that in our natural HPO axis, we know that as the follicles grow, they produce estrogen. And it is this estrogen, when it goes to a level of 200 to 250 picogram in the blood, the pituitary says, oh, the follicle is mature, let me release the LH surge and, make the oocyte M2. But when we are stimulating 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, whatever is the cohort of follicles, as they start growing, together each of these follicles is producing estrogen. And when they are 15 or 14 or 13 millimeters in size, the 5 or 6 oocytes together produce estrogen more than 250 picogram. And so the pituitary doesn't understand how many follicles are there. It understands, yes, estrogen is 250 picogram and now I have to release the LH surge. And so the pituitary starts releasing LH prematurely when we stimulate the follicles with gonadotrophins from outside. And that causes luteinization of our follicles or sometimes rupture of the follicles before we can take out the oocytes. That is why preventing a premature LH surge is a very, very important part of ovarian stimulation for IVF. The other important things we look at is how to prevent OHSS. Again, I said because freezing has become a very, very successful program in all the IVF laboratories. All of them have an OHSS free clinic because whenever the ovary is hyperstimulated, we can give, instead of HCG, Lupride for rupture, and we can prevent, we can even freeze all embryos and transfer in the next cycle. This is called as cycle segmentation and an OHSS-free IVF clinic, where do not give HCG for rupture or the final second maturation of the oocytes and do not transfer the embryos. Then to get the highest quality of oocytes, we have to be very careful with the gonadotrophins that we are using, how much of LH we are exposing our oocytes to. So we get the best quality oocytes so that if we get 10 oocytes, at least 7 should become blastocysts. And the more blastocysts we get, the more we have for freezing, and we definitely would get a higher take-home baby rate or a higher cumulative pregnancy rate. Cumulative pregnancy rate means supposing we have aspirated 15 follicles and we have got 12 blastocysts. Maybe in the first cycle, we may transfer one or two and we may not get a pregnancy. But we still have a lot of blastocysts frozen. And next time we do not have to stimulate the ovary. We don't have to expose her to gonadotrophins again. And we keep transferring to blastocysts every cycle so that in one stimulation, we may get a higher pregnancy rate than giving only a fresh embryo transfer and not being able to freeze. So that is cumulative pregnancy rate. That is how many frozen embryo transfers you do with every stimulation. So this is our natural hypothalamo-pituitary ovarian axis, where we see what happens in the initial part when she gets her menses. We see that a cohort of follicle starts growing. FSH levels at first rise, and then as one follicle grows and estrogen levels start increasing, that is the time when FSH falls. And as FSH starts falling, all the other follicles or the cohort degenerates. Only one follicle starts becoming dominant, and when it secretes enough of estrogen, there is a LH surge. So the cohort doesn't grow because FSH levels fall. If FSH levels remained high, the entire cohort of follicles would have grown and we would have got all the follicles growing. So we want to stimulate all the antral follicles when we want to take the patient up for an IVF program. So if you see, we are seeing two types of ovaries here. One is with a minimum reserve and the other is having a lot of antral follicles. So antral follicle count would be somewhere to the tune of 12, 13, 14. And we want all these small follicles to grow with the gonadotrophins that we are going to give. So we know that falling FSH levels causes only a single follicle to dominate and all the others to undergo atresia. So let us not allow this FSH level to fall. Let us give FSH injections from outside so that we stimulate the entire cohort and we get our desired number of or almost all the antral follicles that the woman has in that cycle. So we are going to give FSH, but which one are we going to give? Our pharmaceutical companies are providing us with urinary FSH. They are providing us with highly purified FSH, recombinant FSH. Very shortly, the market will be flooded with different types of recombinant FSH preparations. We also have HMG preparations, that is, which have got an equal activity of FSH and LH. I'm saying activity, I'm not saying the molecule, because we all know that it's very difficult to get LH from the urinary products, and what they add is HCG instead of LH, and HCG gives the activity of LH in HMG. And we today also have recombinant LH, which can be useful in a small group of patients that we would be discussing. So here we see that we are not giving HMG for our stimulation. We are mostly giving FSH for stimulation. FSH is the chief molecule that brings about the growth of the antral follicles. Then FSH, if you see in the natural cycle also, it is FSH levels which are high in the follicular phase as compared to the LH levels. LH levels are almost at the baseline. What nature has given us two hormones, FSH and LH. But FSH has a longer half-life. FSH levels are high in the follicular phase, whereas the half-life of LH is hardly, the natural LH is hardly 30 to 60 minutes. That of FSH is 3 to 4 hours. And FSH causes the granulosa cells to proliferate, to have more FSH receptors. And as the follicle grows, FSH also induces production of LH receptors, making the follicle sensitive to LH. So we start using more of FSH in the initial part of our stimulation cycle. So stimulating all antral follicles, which of these FSHs are we going to use? Whether we are going to use the urinary metrodin, or we are going to use the highly purified form, or we are going to use the recombinant FSH. What is the difference? Urinary is extracted from menopausal women's urine, and this has got a lot of carbohydrates attached to that FSH, and it has got a longer half-life and it is more acidic. Whereas the recombinant is made from Chinese hamster ovarian cell lines. Nowadays, they are even making from human leukemia cell lines, and this has got less carbohydrates attached to it. So it has got, the recombinant one has got a shorter half-life and it is less acidic. However, it has got a higher affinity to the receptors, the granulosa cell FSH receptors. And then we do not use HMG. I told you routinely we are not using higher level of HMG, because although it is written 150 IU or 75 IU FSH and 75 IU LH, it is actually just 7 to 8 IU of HCG in that HMG bottle which is provided to us. And HCG has got a very long half-life of 24 to 36 hours. And so if we give HMG every day, we start concentrating LH in the woman's body, which can prematurely luteinize our follicles and therefore reduce the quality of our oocytes and produce lesser number of blastocysts. But still, in a small number of patients, we do use HMG when follicles are not responding to FSH in older patients or women with lesser ovarian reserves, that we will discuss. Well, so this is the FSH molecule, and we know that all these gonadotrophins, all of them are glycoproteins. That is, the protein part consists of an alpha chain and a beta chain. Alpha chain of FSH, LH, HCG and TSH is same. All of them have the same sequence of amino acids in their alpha chain. But beta chain is different for each one of them. And it is extremely specific, complementary to their receptor where they are going to act. So this beta chain of FSH is very specific because it acts on the receptor present on the granulosa cell. And whether our product is urinary or highly purified or recombinant, coming from the Chinese hamster cell lines or the human cell lines, the beta chain is going to be the same. What is different is these carbohydrates attached to it. Someone may have more carbohydrates, some may have more branched carbohydrates, some may have lesser carbohydrates, and the end of it is with sialic acid. It's one of the carbohydrate molecules. And this sialic acid increases its pH and its half-life. And therefore, the urinary products, the simple urinary product which we have is a mixture of different FSH molecules with different amount of carbohydrates in it, and therefore the half-life can vary. And the recombinant has lesser carbohydrates and therefore the half-life is very short. So here we see that the simple urinary one has got, it is a combination of FSH with pH more than 4, that is the basic types like the recombinant, and pH less than 7, which has got a longer half-life but lesser affinity to the receptor. Whereas the highly purified has got more of the acidic component of FSH, that is less or more carbohydrates attached to it. And whereas the gonal F, which is recombinant, has got a lot of FSH with very low carbohydrates and a high pH or pH more than 4. What we need is a combination. We need basic as well as acidic. So acidic gives a long half-life, basic gives higher affinity to the FSH receptor. So as on today, we are very happy with this urinary FSH. Now the pharma companies, realizing this, are producing such combinations as FSH, epsilon and delta, and all are coming with a combination of pH in their molecules, although being recombinant. But as on today, our simple urinary FSH is fine for stimulation. The only thing is batch to batch variation may be there and you have to look at the response. And secondly, very small percentage of patients can have some allergic reactions. We have never seen things like prions or infections like that with these urinary products. Well, how long are we going to stimulate the ovaries? Normally, from 2 to 20 mm, the follicles increase by around 2 millimeters per day. So it takes just 10 days for the follicles to become 18 to 20 millimeters. But there can be patient to patient variation. Like the young patients will show a very rapid response. The PCO patients may also show a rapid response. But the older patients, patients with lesser reserves, may show a slower response. So one may take stimulation or give FSH for 9 to 14 days to achieve 18 to 20 millimeters of size of follicles. And mostly on an average, 90% of the patients will require stimulation for just 10 days. Well, what about the dose? How much are we going to use? Are we going to use 150 IU for all, 450 IU, 300 IU? What is going to be our strategy? Are we going to keep the same dose for all or we are going to change? So there are certain factors which affect the gonadotrophin dose, or in what dose some patients will get stimulated and the others will not. The important factors are the type of gonadotrophins that we are using. So because I told you urinary is not en masse, there may be batch to batch variation and you may require higher amount of urinary gonadotrophins and maybe lesser amount of recombinant gonadotrophins daily for patients. Although urinary are cheap, but you may have to give a higher dose in urinary gonadotrophins. Second is the body mass index. Higher the body mass index, larger is the amount of FSH that you are going to give. So for a woman with a BMI of 22 or 21, you will start with 150 IU. But when the BMI goes beyond 28 or 30, you may have to use even 450 international units of FSH every day. It depends also on the AMH. Higher the AMH, lesser is going to be the dose of gonadotrophins. That is, when AMH is less than 1, we may try to use 300 or 450 FSH. But when it is more than 6 or 7, we would try to use lesser amount of gonadotrophins to prevent the risk of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. Of course, we know now with cycle segmentation, that is not our worry. Age. Lesser the age, more sensitive are the follicles to FSH. So in younger age patients, lesser dose will be required, but in higher age patients, higher dose will be required. Then we have a very, very small percentage of patients, which you may all see when you start stimulating ovaries. That small percentage of patients is that you can see the ovaries full of follicles. You know that if you give gonadotrophins, they should start growing, but that never happens. You go on pouring FSH, but the follicles are not growing. This is because they have some small variation in the amino acids present in their FSH receptor. So these are known as FSH receptor polymorphism patients who just refuse to respond to FSH. One small amino acid is changed and the lock and key mechanism no more is working. And these patients may require very high doses of gonadotrophins in order to get stimulated. And once in a year or two, you will see such patients. Okay, so we know that now we are going to stimulate our ovaries with FSH. We may use a urinary product. We will decide the starting dose from the patient's age, body mass index, and from her AMH. And then once we start with the stimulation, are we going to use HMG in any patient? Mostly we are not going to use HMG if she is responding well. But there is a small group of patients when we try to prevent LH surge with the use of an antagonist, the stimulation just doesn't go ahead. Like till yesterday, they were 14 mm and then they are not growing. So in these patients, you may add HMG because they require some LH activity for the follicles to grow. So older age group patients, patients who show a blunted response after starting antagonist, you can add HMG. Or even the poor responders, you may add HMG. And remember, HMG has got HCG in it. So you may just give it on alternate days or after 2 days rather than giving it every day, because then that will have a cumulative effect of high HCG in the body and luteinization of the follicles. Well, now we have grown all our follicles to it. We know how to grow them to 18 to 20 millimeters with the use of FSH and sometimes, if required, with the use of HMG. But we also know that as our follicles are growing, they are producing estrogen. And after 250 picogram level, blood level of estrogen, pituitary is going to release the LH surge. And we do not want a premature LH surge. We want our follicles to become 18 to 20 millimeters before this LH surge starts. Or we do not want the natural LH surge at all. We want to give LH from outside as we are giving FSH from outside. So what do we do? Or why do we want that? Because if the LH surge is premature, our quality of our oocytes will be very poor. They will not fertilize. There will be very, very low pregnancy rate. And sometimes even before we can retrieve the oocytes, the follicles are ruptured. And we have nothing in hand in spite of giving 10 to 12 days of FSH. So we need to stop the pituitary LH surge. And what do we have with us to stop the LH surge? We have a GnRH agonist. Agonist means it is like GnRH. We also have a GnRH antagonist, which antagonizes the action of GnRH. We have the simple molecule of progesterone, which stops the FSH and LH secretion from the pituitary. Or we may just not start stimulation in the follicular phase. We'll start in the luteal phase where progesterone is already present in our body. So let us see how these agonists and antagonists and progesterone, how are we going to fit them in our stimulation program? So what is the mechanism of action of agonist? We all know that the hypothalamus secretes GnRH. And what is this GnRH? It is a decapeptide made up of 10 amino acids. Its short half-life in this natural GnRH has a half-life of just 8 minutes, and it is being secreted in continuous pulses. And what is the agonist? Agonist is also a decapeptide, but at position number 6 of this decapeptide, certain changes are made, which makes this agonist very, very potent. And how does it act? We all know that the pituitary cells are producing FSH and LH. And on the surface of these cells are receptors where the GnRH gets attached. It opens the gates and it releases the FSH and LH into the blood. When we add the agonist is 50 to 100 times more potent and has a much longer half-life than the natural GnRH. So what does the agonist do? It opens the gates rapidly and keeps them open for a very long time. So whatever is the FSH and LH in the pituitary cells is all released. Just think that the pituitary is like a factory producing FSH and LH, and if you open the gates of that factory, all the produce of the factory is gone and now nothing is left. So GnRH agonist, they exhaust the pituitary or remove all the FSH-LH from the pituitary, and then whatever is the stimulation, whatever is the demand, the pituitary says no, we'll take 7 to 8 days to produce new FSH-LH. So the pituitary gets exhausted and the woman becomes hypogonadotrophic. There is no FSH-LH left in her body. So this is how the GnRH agonist acts, by exhausting the pituitary, by removing all the FSH-LH present in the pituitary, and then because that exhausted pituitary doesn't produce any FSH and LH, the woman becomes hypogonadotrophic. And then we add FSH from outside and start stimulating the ovaries. Well, when we have an antagonist, why are we using agonist? For many years, we were using agonist because we didn't have the antagonist. Antagonist was introduced only after 2000. But from 1980s onwards, since IVF, the first IVF started in 1978, in 80s, we got GnRH agonist. And for till 2000, we were only using agonist. And after 2000, we got this antagonist molecule, which we will discuss. But we are still, many centers are still using GnRH agonist. So let us know a little bit about this agonist. So this is the molecular structure of GnRH, where on the amino acid number 6, either leucine, tryptophan, or naphthalene or serine, D-serine is introduced instead of arginine. And this change produces the very potent GnRH agonist. So the agonist gets attached to the receptor on the pituitary cells and causes release of FSH and LH from the pituitary cells. So how do we use the agonist? We make the woman hypogonadotrophic before she gets her periods. So we start our injection of GnRH agonist. Now let us call it anyone, Lupride or Ganirelix or Buserelin, whatever the market preparation. So Lupride, the simple Lupride injection is started 8 to 10 days prior to menstruation. That is in the luteal phase of the previous cycle. And the daily injections, once given to the woman, they cause a flare of FSH and LH. You will see cysts getting formed. The lutein, corpus luteum forms cysts because of high amount of FSH and LH in the blood. And after 8 days, suddenly FSH LH levels start decreasing and almost come to the baseline. When the woman gets her, the corpus luteum dies and the woman gets her menstruation. If we do a transvaginal ultrasound at this time, the ovaries look quiet, endometrium looks scanty, and then in a day or two, we start giving her FSH from outside for 10 days, and then we give the trigger with HCG. This is called as the long agonist protocol, which is was a very popular protocol in the past, the only protocol which was commonly used. The only problem with this protocol was all the gonadotrophins that the ovary received were from outside. So we needed higher doses of gonadotrophins. And the trigger, the final maturation, which occurs with LH surge. LH surge could never occur because the pituitary had no LH in it, and we were forced to give HCG from outside for the maturation of the oocyte. And HCG, as we know, is the only culprit of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So previously, the only risk that patients undergoing IVF had was of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, and in the pre-freezing era, multiple pregnancies. So this is the long agonist protocol. We can use agonist in a long protocol. Similarly, some of the centers were using it as an ultra short protocol. In ultra short protocol, the agonist is given only for 3 days, second, third, and fourth day of the cycle, and suddenly stopped. When you suddenly stop the agonist, the pituitary fails to release any FSH and LH for at least 7 days. So ultra short protocols initially in the pre-antagonist era and even today in some centers are used for women with poor reserves or those with higher age. Now that is because initially when the ovary got lot of FSH and LH, the entire cohort got stimulated, and whatever number of follicles were there, we could get them with lesser dose of FSH because pituitary FSH and LH was being released initially. Short protocol is not being used, but in that protocol, agonist was given from second day of cycle till the day of rupture. But this protocol, almost all centers have given up. An ultra long protocol. What is that? We want to keep the pituitary down regulated for a very long time. In which patients we want to do this? We want to do this only in patients of adenomyosis and endometriosis, where because of menstruation, there is inflammation in the reproductive tract and that will fail implantation. So patients of endometriosis and adenomyosis, we may give GnRH agonist months after months till everything becomes quiet, and only then we will go ahead with an embryo transfer. So these are the agonist protocols. Now, after 2000, we got the GnRH antagonist. Actually, the pharma companies were trying to make antagonists right from 1980s, but every time they failed because whatever antagonist they were making, it was not passing the phase 3 clinical trials because there was very, very severe histamine-like reactions occurring with the drugs that were being produced for antagonist use. And so every time that was being withdrawn from the market. But after 2000, we successfully got antagonists and life of IVF doctors became still easy. And we have two antagonists. One is a ganirelix and the other is citrorelix. So there are about 3 or 4 amino acids which are changed in these. And therefore, these drugs actually block the pituitary receptors immediately after we give it to them. So here we see the same picture, but let us focus on the other side. What does the antagonist do? So hypothalamus releases GnRH. When we give antagonist, it blocks the receptors, and so GnRH does not act on these receptors, and FSH-LH release is completely blocked. So direct gonadotrophin suppression, immediate and direct. So what do we do? How will we use this antagonist? We will, when the woman gets her menstruation and we start with her ovarian stimulation with FSH from outside, say to her 225, 300 IU daily. We call her on the fourth or fifth day, and we see when the ovarian follicles become 14 in size. That is the time when we know that the blood levels of estrogen can produce a premature LH surge. That is the time we start the antagonist. So when leading follicle is 14 or on the fourth or fifth day of stimulation, we give a daily injection of 0.25 milligrams of citrorelix subcutaneously till the day of rupturing HCG. Now, one important thing, in the agonist cycle, FSH and LH is not present at all in the pituitary. But in the antagonist cycle, the pituitary is full of FSH and LH. It is like this factory, the gates are closed. No product is coming out. But if we open the gates, the product will come out. So that is the difference. Here, if you open the gates also, no FSH and LH will come out. Whereas here, if you open the gates, FSH and LH will come out. That is how the antagonist protocol will allow us to use an agonist for release of LH or LH surge. And we may avoid the use of HCG in an antagonist protocol, and so we will avoid ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. The other advantages of antagonist protocol is we need a lesser dose of FSH for stimulation. That is, we have not completely blocked the pituitary. Pituitary, FSH and LH are there in the initial part of the cycle, the 3, 4, 5 days. So whatever stimulation is there, our gonadotrophins are adding to it. Secondly, there is lesser duration of stimulation. Like you may be able to give rupturing within 9 to 10 days. Whereas in the long protocol, you may have to go to 12 to 13 days of stimulation and much higher dose than in the antagonist protocol. So the cost will increase with the long protocol as compared to the antagonist protocol. And thirdly, if you have a hyper responder, an ovary with more than 18 to 20 follicles, then you may avoid OHSs by not giving HCG or just giving a leupride injection or an agonist injection to produce the second meiotic division in the oocytes instead of HCG. And so you can have a OHSS free clinic if you are using antagonist protocol in all hyper responders. So, and antagonist protocols can be given to all types of patients, all types of ovaries. You can use it in the young patients, in the older patients. You can use it in the normal ovaries, hyper-responding ovaries, poor response ovaries. And wherever you have the risk of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, you can use agonist for rupture instead of HCG. So these are all the advantages of antagonist protocol. So most of the IVF centers now have switched to antagonist protocol as compared to the long agonist protocol. Of course, you need experience to use this antagonist protocol. So how do we use the antagonist protocol? So supposing this is the second day of cycle, let's not look at this flare protocol. This is the second day of cycle. We start with the gonadotrophin injections, and by the fourth or fifth day, when the follicles or leading follicles become 14 we give daily injection of antagonist, that is citrorelix or ganirelix. And what it does is it directly suppresses the LH and doesn't allow an LH surge to occur. And then when we stop this agonist, within 24 hours, the pituitary gates can open. Now here you can give HCG or you can give agonist for the LH surge or for the second meiotic division of the oocyte when all the follicles have become 18 to 20 millimeters in size. So when will you specifically, you are not used to antagonist protocol and you're using agonist for all. But in a small group of patients, you would like to use specifically antagonists, and these are the hyper responders and the PCO patients, where we definitely know that if they are producing more than 18 to 20 follicles, then they are going to land in ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome.
I
You
think
may use a ultra short protocol, or you can use a even a long protocol. Any problem?
no, ma'am. The screen was freeze. Now it's okay. Please go ahead.
Okay, okay, fine, fine. See, we have used agonist or antagonist to prevent the LH surge. But in our IVF programs, we have donors where we are not bothered about their endometrium. We don't want to transfer embryos into their uterus. Then we have some patients who are just freezing for social reasons. They want to delay fertility, so they want to freeze their eggs and keep. We have cancer patients who are going to take chemotherapy and radiation, and so to preserve their fertility, they are freezing their eggs or embryos and keeping. We have hyper responding patients where we do not want to transfer embryos in the same cycle. We want to segment the cycle, like producing embryos in one cycle and transferring in the next cycle. So for in all these patients where we do not want to transfer embryos, why should we use costly agonist and antagonist? We can easily use progesterone. We all know that for ages we have used estrogen progesterone OC pills. And what do OC pills contain? They actually contain progesterone. We have 1 milligram of progesterone and 20 to 30 microgram of estrogen. Estrogen in the OC pills is only to stabilize the endometrium and to prevent breakthrough bleeding. The active ingredient is the progesterone, and what progesterone is doing is completely suppressing FSH and LH and making the woman anovulatory. So if we have done it for contraceptive purpose, we can also do it for our IVF patients. So FSH and LH, progesterone will suppress FSH, LH, and we will be able to give gonadotrophins from outside without any LH surge, but at a very, very low cost. So wherever there is a freeze all as our program, it's better to use cheaper progesterone tablets instead of using an agonist or antagonist. So here we see even in a natural cycle, after the corpus luteum grows and it starts producing progesterone, the levels of LH and the levels of FSH are extremely low. This is because progesterone inhibits the release of FSH and LH from the pituitary. So how do we do a progesterone prime stimulation? Here, of course, to stimulate the ovaries, we always use FSH and some amount of FSH-LH. Gonadotrophins have got no alternative. But we can, from the second day, as we start with our scheduled or decided dose of FSH, say 300, 450, 225 IU of FSH every day, we add a tablet of medroxyprogesterone acetate, that is Meparate or Modus, every day till the follicles become 18 to 20 millimeters in size. And on that day, we give a rupturing, we can give Lupride for rupture, or we can give HCG for rupture, and then we can do the pickup. So this is one more beauty of progesterone primed endometrium, that we need not give HCG for rupture. So we will not have any ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. What we are giving is a Lupride or a agonist, GnRH agonist. So a very nice paper was presented by this IVF doctor from Spain, where he said that we can use progesterone to inhibit spontaneous LH surge in our IVF patients. So this is a new era. And in all patients where we are going to do cycle segmentation, whatever be the reason, if we are not going to transfer, we need not use agonist or antagonist. We can always use progesterone to suppress the LH surge. So which progesterone can we use? We can use the simple medroxyprogesterone acetate, we can use dydrogesterone, we can use cyproterone acetate or Dynogest or levonorgestrel or drospirenone. All of them will inhibit the pituitary release of almost all which we use in our OC pills, we can use to prevent a premature LH surge in our stimulation cycles. So we are going to use this progesterone prime stimulation in freeze-all cycles, where we are going to do freeze-all, where we are going to, we have egg donors, or where we are going to freeze eggs in cancer patients, or in social freezing. Okay. See, we saw that giving progesterone prevents a LH surge. Now, sometimes we have oocyte donors and we see a cohort of follicles. The follicle, there is a corpus luteum and there are many, many small follicles seen in the ovary. Can we stimulate them after on the 14th, 15th, 16th day of her cycle? Definitely we can stimulate. The ovary doesn't understand anything, whether it is whether the follicle has ruptured, not ruptured. Ovary doesn't understand estrogen, progesterone. Ovary only understands FSH and LH. So even in the luteal phase, if we start giving injections of FSH, whatever is the cohort of follicles that is seen in the ovary, it starts growing, and you can give it for 8 to 10 days and then give a rupturing HCG, and you are going to get wonderful M2 oocytes. A lot of papers have shown that you can produce euploid blastocysts after luteal phase stimulation and you get the same clinical pregnancy rate. Of course, these blastocysts are going to be frozen. They are not going to be transferred. Endometrium is not prepared, but the ovary can still produce eggs and you can still freeze all the eggs and embryos. Another paper in Fertility Sterility has said that luteal phase after conventional stimulation in the same ovarian cycle might improve the management of poor responders. So in the poor responders, you may stimulate them in the follicular phase, and after 5 days you can start stimulating in the luteal phase. So in one cycle you do 2 pickups, one at 14th or 12th or 13th day and other again on the 28th day, and overall you get more embryos for transfer in poor responders. Of course, in the luteal phase, you do not have to give anything to suppress LH because already the corpus luteum in the ovary is producing progesterone and FSH LH levels are very, very low. Now, can we start stimulation on any day? We know that cancer patients come with great fear because they want to first live. They want to first fight their cancer. So they want to start their chemo, radio as early as possible. So whenever they come, if you see a small cohort of follicles, you can just start stimulation on any day. This is because the ovary has follicular waves. It is not that the antral follicles on the second day only can get stimulated. Antral follicles on any day of the cycle can get stimulated with FSH. And after one stimulation, again after 5 days, you can start with a second stimulation so that in a very short time, you can stimulate maximum follicles, aspirate as many eggs as possible, produce as many embryos and freeze them and keep in the interest of these cancer patients. Similarly, egg donors, there is no need of synchronizing the recipient and donor. You can just start the egg donor stimulation anytime once the recipient gets her periods. Getting periods and stimulating the endometrium with estrogen is more important than stimulating the ovary after menses. The ovary can be stimulated on any day of the menstrual cycle because there are follicular waves. This is a new concept, and now we do not wait for menstruation to start with stimulation if we are going to freeze or we are not bothered about the endometrium. Well, when we start these stimulations, now we either use a long protocol or an antagonist protocol or a progesterone primed stimulation. How are we monitoring these patients? Are we calling them every day for sonography? Are we doing their estrogen levels, progesterone levels, LH levels? Are we doing all this every day? In modern IVF stimulation programs, we are not doing any of these things. All we are doing is a simple ultrasound examination of the ovaries, and we expect the ovarian follicles to grow at the rate of 2 millimeters per day. So if we have a cohort of 3 to 4 in the beginning, the size of the follicles, we know by the 10th or 11th day of stimulation, they are going to become 18 to 20 millimeters in size. Only one test we do if we are going to transfer the embryos in the same cycle is a serum progesterone level on the day of HCG. This is because our endometrium is extremely sensitive. Our implantation window is there. That is, embryos will get implanted only and only on the 5th to 7th day of progesterone. If progesterone levels have increased during stimulation anytime, then the implantation window will close and even the best embryos will not implant in the fresh cycle. So we do a progesterone level on the day of HCG. Other than that, we do none of these tests like LH, E2, P2 on any of the days of the stimulation. All that you do is a follicular study. Mostly When we want to start with the antagonist, that is on the 5th or 6th day, we see the size of the follicles. Or if she's on a long protocol, we directly call her on the 8th, 9th, or 10th day of the cycle for an ultrasound examination. So additional hormonal panel is not recommended. Well, we know that once our follicles have grown to 18 to 20 millimeters, the rupture, the second meiotic division in the oocyte, is not going to happen unless there is an LH surge. And this LH surge can be achieved by giving HCG, which is I told you all gonadotrophins have an alpha and a beta chain. And the beta chain of HCG and LH is absolutely same in its molecular content. The only thing which HCG has got a long C terminal with lot of carbohydrates attached to it, and therefore HCG has a very long half-life as compared to LH. Since pharmaceutical companies are not able to give us LH, we can achieve LH by using GnRH agonist, that is causing the pituitary to release its LH. And if our pituitary is exhausted, we have no other choice than using HCG for the second maturation division or the rupture of the follicles. So lot of events happen with the LH surge. That is, the GV oocyte becomes an M2 oocyte only and only after an LH surge, and not without a LH surge. There is nothing like an empty follicle syndrome. All the follicles have oocytes. And only if our HCG or our LH surge is not correct, whatever we aspirate, we will not get the oocyte if LH surge is not given to these oocytes. They'll remain stuck to the follicular wall. They will not loosen, they will not get released. So this is the molecular structure of LH, and the similar is the molecular structure of HCG, except that this C terminal has got many carbohydrate molecules, giving HCG a very stable, making it very stable and having a higher half-life of almost 24 or more than 24 hours. I think it is almost 36 hours, whereas that of LH is between 30 to 60 minutes. So normally it is best to give HCG for rupture because you will get highest number of M2 oocytes when you give HCG. But when you want to prevent ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, we will use the agonist trigger. So we know that HCG does all those activities which the normal or a natural LH surge does. What does it do? It disrupts the oocyte cumulus cell contact, causes resumption of meiosis, luteinization of the granulosa cells, and secretion of progesterone. So LH-HCG mechanism of action is that resumption of, the metaphase 1 becomes metaphase 2. When we give LH from outside, our leupride, the activity of LH lasts only for 20 hours. And so there is a very strong luteal phase defect when leupride is given or agonist is given for LH surge. The natural LH surge lasts for around 20 hours. But when we give HCG for trigger, HCG remains in the body for almost 6 days. And so the corpus luteum is supported for 6 days. So HCG is one of the best molecules for second meiotic division of the oocyte. The only problem with HCG is the risk of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome in hyperresponders. So all normal responders, all poor responders, we would like to give HCG for rupture, and only the hyperresponders where risk of OHSS is there, we will be giving this leupride for trigger, and we'll be using the antagonist protocol and not the long protocol in the hyperresponders. Well, we have urinary HCG and we have recombinant HCG. The problem again with urinary is the same, lot of batch to batch inconsistency, and sometimes the cold chain is also not maintained. These urinary products need a cold chain and a temperature of 2 to 8 degrees to remain active. Whereas the recombinant are active even at 25 degrees centigrade, and the purity is very high, and the specificity and mass, if they say 250 microgram, it will contain 250 microgram of HCG only. So that is the advantage. And we know that if we have to get oocytes, we have to have HCG, active HCG. And so it's always better to use recombinant HCG rather than urinary HCG. So that previously whatever we felt that there is empty follicles, we have aspirated and nothing has come out. It is only because our urinary HCG was not good, or there was no activity in that drug. So how much of HCG will you give? The best is to give 10,000 IU of urinary HCG if you are using urinary, because 98% of the oocytes will be M2 and they will be successfully retrieved with 10,000 IU of HCG. If you're using recombinant, then there is no difference between 250 and 500 microgram. But if you use 500 microgram, probably you will cause ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So if we use 250, here we see in this chart that VEGF levels go very high and chances of OHSS become high in those patients who get 500 IU of 500 micrograms of recombinant HCG. Although almost 100% of the oocytes will be retrieved, whatever is the number of follicles growing, same will be the number of oocytes that will be retrieved when we use recombinant HCG. So when will we use agonist? Agonist does the same thing as our natural LH surge, except that it remains for a shorter duration. So whenever there is a risk of hyperstimulation syndrome, we will use the agonist, and we will not transfer the embryos, we will freeze all the embryos. If at all we take a decision of transferring the embryos, then we have to give a very strong luteal phase support in the form of injection of 1500 IU of HCG every 4th or 5th day, which we will discuss in CL support. Well, the culprit of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome is HCG and only HCG and nothing else. It is not your gonadotrophins, it is not FSH, it is not LH, it is not agonist, it is not antagonist, nothing. It is only HCG, because HCG causes production of VEGF, that is vascular endothelial growth factor, from the small follicles, and that causes the leak of fluid from the capillaries in the third space. OHSS has a high mortality. I would say even 3 in 1 lakh patients undergoing IVF. A mortality is not acceptable, and therefore in today's era, OHSS is not acceptable. So how do we prevent OHSS? So we do not give HCG. It is universally accepted that whenever there is a high response, that is when we have more than 18 follicles of more than 11 mm, do not give HCG, give Lupride for rupture. And do a cycle segmentation. What is cycle segmentation? We give Lupride for rupture, we aspirate all the follicles, we get M2 oocytes, we fertilize them, we get blastocysts, we will freeze all the blastocysts, we will not give any CL support. We'll call the woman to come after menstrual cycles, and usually she gets her cycle within 7 to 8 days. And then in her natural cycle, next natural cycle, we will transfer these blastocysts which we have frozen. So this is called as cycle segmentation. In patients at risk of, this is what ESHRE has given in its guidelines. Patients with the risk of OHSS, the use of GnRH agonist for final oocyte maturation is recommended over HCG when no fresh transfer is to be performed. So we now know that our second meiotic division of our oocytes can be achieved with HCG or Lupride. Well, we have given HCG, we have aspirated the oocytes, and now we have to give a corpus luteum support. All patients who undergo ovarian stimulation with gonadotrophins have a defective corpus luteum phase. Why? Because the pituitary cannot produce that much LH to sustain so many corpus luteum. It cannot produce. And so these corpus luteum die and progesterone levels fall. So for corpus luteum support, we have progesterone, we have estrogen, we have HCG, we have GnRH agonist, and we have dydrogestone. In a natural conception, what happens? We have an LH surge and the progesterone secretion continues for almost 14 days. And at the end of 14 days, either HCG starts getting produced from the pregnancy or the corpus luteum dies and the woman gets her menstruation. But in a hyperstimulated cycle, we have this the luteal phase is shortened. It is only for 6 to 7 days. After that, the corpus luteum doesn't survive. And because progesterone is lost, even if the embryo is implanted, the endometrium will start shedding out. So we have to give luteal phase support whenever there is a stimulated cycle. The statement given in 2003 is luteal phase of all stimulated IVF cycles is abnormal, and progesterone support is a must if we are doing embryo transfer in the same cycle. So why does it happen? There is premature luteolysis because there is less LH for so many corpus luteal, because there is high steroids. Progesterone initially is high. So again, pituitary is not going to produce LH. And again, these corpus luteal are going to die. So what do we have? We have progesterone, we have HCG, we have dydrogesterone, we have recombinant LH, and we have GnRH agonist bolus. Now, what does ESHRE recommend? ESHRE says that progesterone is recommended for luteal phase support in all patients undergoing IVF and ICSI. Now, progesterone, we know pure progesterone in oil is available in oral, vaginal, intramuscular, aqueous forms. And we have one more molecule, that is dydrogesterone, which is agonist of progesterone, which can be given orally. Well, the progesterone dose which we give, so injectable progesterone, if it is, what should be the dose? Whether it should be 50 milligram or it should be 100 milligram. Honestly, all the Cochrane reviews say that there is no difference when you give low or high dose, 50 or 100 milligrams of progesterone as a corpus luteum support in all patients after they have undergone a stimulation and pickup for IVF. So when do we start? Ideally, we should start on the same day of oocyte pickup. Some centers like to start it on the 3rd day, but maximum late should be 6th day, because HCG activity will stop on day 6 and corpus luteum will start dying. So by which route you can give? You can give it by oral, you can give aqueous, subcutaneous, vaginal, or you can give vaginal suppositories. You can even give rectal progesterone. All of them are justified. The only thing is the oral goes through liver and gets damaged, and very less amount of progesterone comes in the blood as compared to the subcutaneous, intramuscular, vaginal, or rectal route. So starting progesterone for luteal phase support should be in the window between the evening of day of oocyte pickup or oocyte retrieval and day 3 post oocyte retrieval. So within that time, best to start on the same day of oocyte retrieval. And how long should we give progesterone? We should give progesterone till we do a pregnancy test, that is 14 days after the embryo transfer. We should continue with progesterone, and if the pregnancy test comes negative, stop progesterone. If it is positive, there are centers which continue it till 6 weeks, the others continue it till 8 weeks, but at least for 5 weeks, progesterone should be continued till the placenta takes up and starts producing the amount of progesterone required. Well, there are studies now. We know that this progesterone in oil has got its own problems. When we take it orally, we do not achieve the levels and patient feels very drowsy. When we take it vaginally, it is very messy. When we give it intramuscular, there are a lot of abscesses and redness and irritation. So everything with the oily progesterone, the pure progesterone in oil, is a little difficult and messy for the patient. So studies were done with the use of dydrogesterone. So it is a retrosteroid, just L and D form of the steroid has been changed. It has been created by treatment with UV light. It is given orally. It gets concentrated in the endometrium, and it gives similar pregnancy rates as the use of pure progesterone in oil. And therefore, dydrogesterone, or dufastone as we call it, has become extremely popular as a CL support in patients undergoing IVF. Do we add estrogens? Basically, we do not add estrogens, but when we are using cycles where we have not stimulated the ovaries, but we are doing an embryo transfer only, Where we have stimulated the endometrium with estrogens, we continue with the same dose of estrogens. Some centers like to give 2 milligrams of estrogen daily along with progesterone in order to prevent a breakthrough bleeding at the time of implantation, that is on the 7th or 8th day post pickup. But ESHRE does not recommend. Addition of estrogen to progesterone for luteal support is probably not recommended in the stimulated cycles. Do we give HCG for corpus luteum support? We know that corpus luteum dies because there is no LH coming from the pituitary. So we have HCG, a long-acting LH with us. Why not give it? It does work, but the only problem is if she's at a risk of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, probably that will get precipitated. In HCG triggered ovarian stimulation cycles, that is where we have used HCG for the second meiotic division or for rupture, giving HCG for luteal support in a standard dose of 1500 IU is probably not recommended. We will give HCG for luteal phase support when we have given Lupride for rupture, where we know there is luteolysis, when we know that LH levels are going to be very low after about 20 hours. So in those patients, 1500 IU of HCG is given, provided we are going to transfer embryos in the same cycle. Agonist. Some people try to give GnRH agonist. Let the agonist release LH from the brain and maintain the corpus luteum. But again, ESHRE says that GnRH agonist bolus, in addition to progesterone for luteal phase support in HCG triggered cycle, can only be used in the context of clinical trials. It has not been justified, or its safety profile is still insufficient to be used routinely in corpus luteum support in patients undergoing IVF. So in short, we have understood that we are going to stimulate our ovaries to get the entire cohort of follicles growing with the help of FSH and sometimes in small doses of HMG for 10 days. Dose of this FSH which we are going to use varies from 150 IU to right up to 600 IU. But most of the patients would be happy with a 225 IU. The higher doses may be required in women with higher BMI and higher age, and those with a polymorphism of the FSH receptor. Lower doses are required in thin, young patients with high AMH. The minimum time which is required for stimulation of the follicles to 18 to 20 mm is around 10 days. Then the rupturing dose can be given with the help of HCG. HCG can be given in urinary or recombinant form. The recombinant HCG we give 250 micrograms and urinary we give 10,000 IU. Wherever there is risk of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, we avoid the use of HCG for rupture. And in these patients, we use an antagonist protocol instead of an agonist protocol and give Lupride for rupture. Corpus luteum support, the best molecule is progesterone. It can be pure progesterone in oil given vaginally or intramuscularly, or it can be dydrogestone. Apart from that, HCG, estrogen, agonists, all these are still not recommended by ESHRE in a stimulated cycle. So let us go back. Fine, I think I want to share the screen with everyone now. Hello? Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Please tell me.
Yeah, now the two questions, the first two cases.
Yeah.
So who is there?
Ma'am, we have Dr. Jayashree ma'am, Dr. Nafiza ma'am, Dr. Geeta ma'am.
So I think I'll ask Dr. Jayashree, the first case. Male factor infertility, 23-year-old patient, BMI 23, AMH 3. Which protocol you will use?
Dr. Jayashree ma'am, you are a co-host. You can unmute yourself.
I can't see her.
Dr. Jayashree ma'am, you can start your audio and video. Dear participants, you can start your audio and video so that you can have a direct interaction with ma'am based on these case studies. So we have Dr. Meeta ma'am, Dr. Nirmala ma'am.
Yeah, anyone can give the answer. No problem. I think I can see Dr. Jayashree.
Yes, yes. Dr. Jayashree ma'am, please start your video. Yeah.
Hello, ma'am. Will you repeat the question?
Yeah, see, we have a patient. The husband's sperm count is just 3 million.
Okay.
And of course, we are going to do ICSI for this patient.
Yeah, she is for IVF, ICSI.
She is for ICSI. Now she comes and on the second day of her cycle, her BMI is 23.
Okay.
Her AMH is just 3.
Okay.
She is 23 years old.
Okay.
So now you want to start with her stimulation for IVF. She's your patient and you are stimulating her for IVF. Or ICSI.
Short protocol can be started with FS. Hello?
Yes, I'm hearing, yeah.
Because as her BMI is below 25, FSH, she will require more, up to 150 or?
Correct. She is young and she has low BMI, so you will have less FSH. Very good. So stimulation will be with FSH, say 150 IU.
Yeah.
Daily for 10 days. And how will you prevent the LH surge?
I think no need of giving means antagonist. Is there a need?
Yes, because see, she has a AMH of 3.
Yeah,
so
correct.
you are going to get at least 10
satisfactory
to 12 follicles. 10
satisfactory
to 12 follicles
fertility
are growing, and they are going to at the when they become 14 the total estrogen in her body will become 250, 300, and there will be premature LH surge.
Correct.
So you will call her on the 5th day, and if they have become 13, 14 you will start antagonist.
Yeah, correct.
That is Citrorelix every day, 0.25 milligrams subcutaneous, and you will continue stimulation till the 10th day.
Yeah.
Now you have started Citrorelix, and after 3 days she comes to you and you see that the follicles are only 15 So what will you do? They have not grown. That Citro has become very strong for her. There is no LH coming from her pituitary.
Okay. So again, topping the dose?
You will add HMG.
Okay. But the size is very less. Follicle size is very less.
Yeah, but HMG has got just 75 IU of LH activity.
Yes, you told.
We need baseline LH activity. And now we know that the follicles have got LH receptors and they will start responding. Right?
Okay.
Yeah. So our 2-cell theory says that LH will produce testosterone from theca cells and that testosterone will become estrogen.
Okay.
Right? But if completely blocked LH is there, follicles may not grow, and that is the time you will add HMG. But you will not give it every day. You will give it on alternate or say after 2 days. Just one HMG, you call her again and see. And if they are growing, fine. Then after 2 days, you may again add one HMG, 75 IU. So that is how your patient will get thoroughly stimulated. If you have 12 follicles, you are going to get 12 oocytes. What will you use for rupture?
SCG can be used.
Absolutely. She has no risk of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So you can always use HCG for rupture. Which HCG and how much dose?
10,000 SCG?
Urinary. Or I would like to use recombinant.
Recombinant 250.
I don't want her to waste all the money of FSH because my recombinant was, my urinary was not cold chain maintained.
Then recombinant 250.
Always better to spend a little more on recombinant and give recombinant HCG, because if HCG activity is not there, you will never get oocytes when you are aspirating the follicles. So use the best HCG, and that is 250 micrograms of
recombinant.
Recombinant subcutaneously, just below the umbilicus, 36 hours before ovum pickup.
Yes.
Okay, so you did her ovum pickup. You got 12 eggs, we did ICSI. Now we have got 9 blastocysts. What next?
Then
On the day of pickup, what medicines you will start?
progesterone, injectable
Corpus luteum
progesterone,
support.
100 milligram IM,
Yes, very
along
good.
SCG, and SCG also can be given.
Yeah, you may or may not give HCG because now we know that HCG does nothing.
Yes,
Nothing much, only increases the risk of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, but in her, there is no risk of ovarian hyperstimulation.
yes,
The most important molecule of CL support is progesterone,
yes, 100
yes,
milligram IM.
intramuscular. Now she comes to you on the 5th day, on the day of ET, and she says, Madam, I've got abscesses and I've started getting fever. What will you do?
Antibiotic
You will
should be
see
added.
most of the patients who get progesterone in oil intramuscular, they get abscesses.
Yes.
So what will you do?
Vaginal progesterone is the best
Yes,
option,
you can give
400 milligram.
vaginal twice daily,
Yes, twice.
or
And
200 3 times.
yeah, and you told
You
dydrogesterone.
may give dydrogesterone.
It
That
is
is
costlier,
glucophage.
but
Yes,
oral is
yeah, it is very, very patient friendly.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Till what date you will give? You have transferred embryos. You have transferred 2 embryos, frozen off all the others.
Yes, up to UPT, after the 15 days after the ET, we will
Right.
check for the pregnancy test. If it comes
Yes,
positive, then it will be continued up to 6 weeks.
correct. Till you see the fetal heart.
Yes.
That is good. Excellent. So you have managed your case very well. Next case. The next case is 30-year-old, BMI is 30, AMH is 7, bilateral tubal block. Who wants to do this case? Anyone? Dr. Meeta.
Dr. Meeta ma'am, I'm making you a co-host. Please try and unmute yourself. You can also start your video. Dr. Meeta ma'am, you can unmute yourself.
Anyone else interested also can go ahead, not a problem.
Can you repeat your question, Manju?
Yeah, Meeta. She is 30 years old.
Okay.
Her BMI is 30.
Hmm.
Her AMH is 7.
Hmm.
And she has bilateral tubal block.
Okay.
And you want to stimulate her for IVF.
With a BMI 30 and AMH 7, she seems to be a PCOD patient.
Correct. Very correct.
So we'll start her on FSH, if
Yes.
possible, recombinant or highly purified. She may require about 150 to start with.
No, her BMI is high. 30.
We start
Always,
with 75.
I know. See, when we are going to do IUI, we have a step-up protocol. When we are doing IVF, we like to do a step-down protocol. So we will, just because her BMI is high, we would like to start with at least a dose of minimum 300. I would have even started with 450.
Okay. Don't you go for step-up protocol these days?
No, because in step-up, you will get lesser number of eggs. Whereas in IVF, our aim is to get all the eggs possible.
Okay, so you would go for,
I would
300.
go for step down because BMI is high, I would start with at least 300.
Okay, 300 and continue with 300, say a 5th day of stimulation, see for her sonography and growth.
No, but how will you prevent her LH surge? She has a high chance of getting a premature LH surge.
Yeah, once we see that the follicles are around 14, we can start on cytorelicts.
So antagonist. So you will prefer an antagonist protocol in her and not a long or any other protocol.
Okay, yeah.
Only antagonist.
In these cases, you don't down-regulate at all these days?
No, because if you down-regulate, you will not be able to give leupride for rupture. You will have to give HCG.
Yeah, that's true.
And then she'll land in ovarian hyperstimulation.
Yeah.
So we like to give antagonist. So supposing now you have given Citrorelix 0.25 subcutaneous along with 300 FSH, how will you monitor her?
Monitor her after every 2 days for sonography and find out the increasing
rate
size
of growth
follicles.
of follicles.
Yeah.
Now
if things are going fine,
Yeah, it so happens that you do a transvaginal ultrasound on the 5th day when she comes, when you want to start Citro. And the follicles are just 9 mm. So 4th day you have called her, 5th day you have called her. And the
Then
follicles are not grown.
we will still withhold the antagonist. We'll not give her now.
Yes, we'll
And
not
we'll
give
we may have to increase the dose
dose
of
of
FSH.
FSH. Very correct. So we may have to go for 450.
Yeah. And
Or
again,
then
follow her up for
if
the
we are
next 2
using a
days.
urinary product, maybe it is not a very effective one. It is not really having the quantity of FSH activity
Yeah.
that it is claiming, and we may have to change the brand or
Okay,
use
so-
recombinant.
Yeah, right.
And what will you now? You did her her ultrasound on the 10th day, and you are getting about 10 follicles on the right side and 12 follicles on the left side, all 18 to 20 millimeters.
Okay.
So
That day we stop with the antagonist.
right,
And for a trigger, we would like to give a agonist,
right,
GN analog.
right. How
And
much you will give? 1 milligram. 1 milligram Lupride.
1 milligram.
1 milligram. Yeah. Okay. And then after 36 hours, we will do a ovum pickup. Now you got 26 eggs. And you got 22 blastocysts.
Yeah.
45. So after pickup, what will you tell her? Will you do embryo transfer? You'll not do.
Actually, you have, if the patient is willing, you would like to cryopreserve the eggs and look for a
Yeah, you
second
will always
settlement.
do a cycle segmentation in these patients.
But what is the harm if you have given Lupride? Does it still cause hyperstimulation syndrome?
Lupride will not cause, but
Yeah.
Lupride will do one thing, that is, it will cause luteal phase defect. One. And secondly, when you transfer embryos in these patients, then when they become pregnant, they will start producing HCG and you will have secondary hyperstimulation syndrome after
Okay.
8 days. So they
So
are
with
always
number of
at a
eggs,
risk of OHSS.
so when you have a number of eggs more than say 10, you would always
18,
like for
more than 18.
more than
18 is
18.
the
Okay.
cutoff. That
Okay.
we will say cycle segmentation. And if patient still wants her own, we have given her Lupride for rupture, you take complete consent of OHSS and then you give a special luteal phase support with the help of progesterone and HCG every 3rd day, low dose HCG, that is 1500 IU HCG every 3rd day. And they
Okay.
still have a risk of OHSS.
OHSS, yeah.
Right. So I think everybody has understood, and I'm very sure everybody is going to take their patients to, they are not going to write a note to IVF center. They are going to stimulate and say, okay, do the pickup, make her embryos and let me know.
Great. Great.
So you should use IVF labs like a lab and our clinics like our clinics.
Absolutely.
Good. Nice. Nice. Very nice.
Manju, a nice deliberation as usual. Very nice.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. This will be on the web. You can read again. Or
Yeah,
maybe-
yeah.
Yeah. And you can start stimulating your own patients.
Yeah, yeah.
We'll soon share this
Thank you.
sharing with you all, maybe in next 24 to 48 hours, right? So thank you, ma'am. As always, it was a fantastic deliberation. Importantly, the question and answer session, what you keep in the last,
Yeah,
really
I
gives a value add.
Yeah, that makes me realize whether whatever I'm telling is actually being understood or not.
It is
No,
indeed.
I'm happy. I'm really happy.
Yeah.
Chalo, thanks a lot. Thank you
So,
very
ma'am,
much.
with your permission, I'll take 1 minute of yours to announce to everybody that we have a channel called IVF Virtual Academy, where we actually load all these webinars. So till date, we have completed almost 142 webinars. And for Dr. Manjujila ma'am, this is our 4th Materna School of ART. So all these are available on those channel, IVF Virtual Academy. One more important announcement, what I like the world to know, and we are equally proud at MCure, that MCure's vaccine for corona, so it is basically mRNA vaccine, is stable at 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. So very important, innovative thing what we are bringing, considering the cold chain issues or hinterland reach channels in India. So we are equally proud to announce that our mRNA vaccine has been taken up for trials, and this will give us a different aspect in terms of MCure service to the community.
Chalo, congratulations.
Thank you. Kishore,
Thank you, madam.
just
Sorry,
close.
I was traveling, so not available.
Chalo. The next topic would be on the endometrium.
Great. Thank you,
madam.
Thank you for it.
Right. Okay.
So, dear participants, thank you for attending this webinar, and we will soon be coming up with next date by Dr. Manjujila ma'am. Ma'am, with your permission, I'll roll up a MCure video and then we can close down, right?
Fine. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am, for you being there. It matters a lot. And we'll be waiting for your next session.
Yes. We'll decide the date. It will be on endometrial preparation for embryo transfer.
Please, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, madam.